Welcome back to Chapter 5. In our second video, our focus will be on parasitic helminths, or worms, and their role in human health. By the end of this video, you should be able to explain why we study worms in microbiology, compare the basic body structures of major helminth groups, describe the characteristics of nematodes, trematodes, and cestodes, and include examples, identify common infections caused by these worms, and finally classify them into their main groups. Helminths are multicellular animals. They're worms. So why are they in microbiology? It's because we often identify them through microscopic eggs and larvae. That makes them important for diagnosis in the lab. We generally group them into two major categories: the roundworms, which are part of this phylum Nematoda, and flatworms, which are in this phylum Platyhelminthes. And sometimes you'll just hear them commonly called nematodes and platyhelminths. So these worms often have reduced digestive and nervous systems, but often still have a pretty complex reproductive system involving more than one host. Looking at their reproductive strategies, some worms, some species, will be monoecious, and that means they have both male and female organs in the same individual. So one worm will have both male and female reproductive organs. Others are dioecious, and that means there are separate sexes, separate male and female worms. And why do we care? We care because we want to know which ones are able to lay and spread their eggs and thus transmit the disease to other hosts. And sometimes you'll hear me say monoecious instead of monoecious and dioecious instead of dioecious, just because I'd like to stress the presence of that O when we're actually spelling it for quizzes or exams. Our first category are the nematodes, or roundworms. These are unsegmented worms with a complete digestive tract. What this means in worms and in other animals like us, this is a one-way system for food to travel through the body, with a distinct opening at the anterior end, the mouth, for intake, and the posterior end, the anus, for waste removal. Many of these worms are intestinal parasites. So, for example, we have Ascaris lumbricoides. This is a large intestinal parasite in humans and can cause symptoms ranging from mild discomfort to intestinal blockage. Enterobius vermicularis is the pinworm, and it's the most common nematode infection in the U.S. This causes anal itching, especially at night. For our hookworms, we have Necator americanus and Cyclostoma duodenale, and these can lead to anemia and fatigue. Trichinellus spiralis causes trichinosis, and it's contracted from undercooked meat and encysts in muscle tissue. So it'll embed itself into muscle tissue, and if we eat undercooked meat, which is essentially muscle tissue, it can cause trichinosis, and that leads to pain, nausea, and vomiting. Finally, we have Dirofilaria immitis, the dog heartworm, and this is transmitted by mosquitoes and can be fatal to pets. And this is an image of Enterobius vermicularis, or at least part of it, the pinworm, under the microscope. In these worms, adult females are significantly larger than males, about 2 to 4 times larger, and they have a characteristic long pointed tail that gives the worm its name. Pinworms are most common in children in the U.S., especially at school age and in preschool age children, because they have frequent hand-to-mouth contact and close proximity in these settings, like the schools and daycare centers. So this is a picture of a patient with a pinworm infection, and if you're a parent or a caregiver, maybe you're changing their diaper, you might think that these little pieces are tissue or some kind of residue from the diaper. But if you look closely, you'll see that they're actually moving around. And kids get pinworm and spread it very easily because when they get itchy, they scratch, right? They'll go and scratch, and then maybe they'll eat food or a snack, and that gets spread to others very quickly. On the left of this slide, we have pictures of hookworms. So these are different hookworms, like Cyclostoma, Necator, so named because at their mouth or anterior end, you can see the specialized structures to latch onto our intestines. And on the right, we see Ascaris. So Ascaris lumbricoides, If I look at the size difference between the two types of worms, Ascaris can range from between 6 to 19 inches long, or that's about 15 to 50 centimeters. Whereas for these hookworms, they're only about 10 millimeters in length on average. All right, the most common nematode infection in the United States was the pinworm, right? Caused by Enterobius vermicularis, causes anal itching, especially at night. Our next category of worms are the trematodes, which are also known as flukes, and they are also part of this phylum, Platyhelminthes. Remember, they are also flatworms. Trematodes are non-segmented flatworms that have suckers for attachment. They also usually have a mouth but no anus. This means they have an incomplete digestive tract, so this worm only has a single opening that serves as both their mouth and their anus. So nutrient intake comes in through the mouth, and waste also comes back out of that opening. They can infect intestines, the liver, the lungs, and blood vessels in humans, and often require multiple hosts, most commonly snails and humans. Examples include liver flukes like Clonorchis or Episthorchis. We have intestinal flukes like Fasciolopsis buski, lung flukes, Paragonimus westermani, and blood flukes, which are different species within the Schistosoma genus. These last ones cause schistosomiasis, and schistosomiasis is second only to malaria in its global impact. This figure shows the complex life cycle of schistosoma, which involves freshwater snails as intermediate or secondary hosts. So don't worry about the detailed steps or vocab terms shown here. We're going to just summarize the very basic steps. So schistosoma has spiny eggs, so I can see the spine right here, and also spiny larvae that can penetrate snail tissue. Eventually, the free-swimming larval forms of this trematode or fluke are going to be shed from the snail, and their main purpose is to find and penetrate a suitable new host, which unfortunately for us could be us humans. Once they penetrate our skin, they transform into the adult worm. So the larvae can burrow through our human skin when someone comes into contact with contaminated water. So you can get it from contact with fresh water like rivers, lakes, or creeks that contain the snails that carry this. And I wanted to show you a variety of different pictures of these trematodes or flukes to show you how they're leaf-shaped and they're flat. The length can vary really between different species. Some of them have an average of about 8 millimeters, so in the millimeters range, and others can get to even around 10 centimeters long. Our third and final type are cestodes, also known as tapeworms. These are also part of the phylum Platyhelminthes. So cestodes are segmented flatworms, and their bodies are made up of kind of a rectangular shaped pieces or segments called proglottids. These contain their reproductive organs, and a gravid proglottid is the posterior most segment of a tapeworm or cestode that's filled with fertilized eggs. These are then released into the host feces in order to continue the parasite's life cycle. The head or scolex has suckers to attach to our intestinal walls. There's no digestive system, interestingly, in these worms, so there's no mouth or anus. Instead, they absorb pre-digested nutrients from their host. And their life cycle will involve eggs that develop into larval stages and then become cysts in intermediate hosts. And then adult worms in the intestine of the definitive host occurs if we eat undercooked meat containing these cysts. So I have several examples listed below. Taenia saginata is the beef tapeworm and generally causes mild digestive upset. Taenia solium is the pork tapeworm and can cause a more serious condition called cysticercosis when larvae migrate to tissues like the brain. Diphyllobothrium latum, the fish tapeworm, can reach up to 15 meters in length, which is equivalent to almost 50 feet, so super long. And then our last one here, Echinococcus or Echinococcus granulosus is the dog tapeworm, and that can cause hydatid disease in humans. This figure shows how tapeworms move between intermediate and definitive hosts before maturing into adults in the intestines. So we start with this part right here where eggs or gravid proglottids, remember that these are the segments that are filled with fertilized eggs, when these get ingested by intermediate hosts, like cows or pigs, it really depends on the species of the parasitic worm. The worm develops into a cyst within the animal host's muscle tissue, and we get infected when we eat undercooked meat containing these cysts. The worms will mature in our bodies, where the scolex will attach to our intestines, forming ultimately segmented proglottids, and those are going to release more eggs or gravid proglottids into the feces to continue the cycle. Here we have a variety of different species of tapeworms. You can see a tapeworm by itself at the top left. This is tapeworm in goat feces on the right, and tapeworm in rabbit feces on the bottom left. Let's define two important terms we've seen in some of the previous slides: intermediate host and definitive host. The definitive host, sometimes called the primary host, is where the parasite reaches sexual maturity. So this is where the adult worm lives and reproduces. For example, in the beef tapeworm, the Taenia saginata, humans are the definitive host because the adult tapeworm lives in the human intestine and produces eggs there. In contrast, the intermediate or the secondary host is where the parasite develops but does not reproduce sexually. So this is where you usually see the larval stages. Going back to that example, Taenia saginata, the cow is the intermediate host. The larvae form cysts inside the cow's muscle tissue. So in simple terms, the intermediate host is where the intermediate host is where growth and development occurs, whereas in the definitive host, this is where we see reproduction and egg production. So what is hydatid disease and what are hydatid cysts? These are cysts that contain a watery fluid and that can be formed by and contain tapeworm larvae. So the symptoms for the patient really depends on the cyst location, but can include things like abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, or even a chronic cough. These cysts are pretty slow growing, so symptoms can take years to develop. But for the eye or brain, if cysts develop there, symptoms usually appear a little bit earlier. So larvae hatching from the ingested eggs in our intestines can enter the circulation and then spread to different tissues where they form these hydatid cysts. The liver is the most common organ involved at 77% shown here, followed by the lungs, and the brain is fairly rare, showing up in about 2% of cases. These images from the right come from the brain of a 22-year-old Caucasian female with multiple cerebral hydatid cysts. So what happened was she came in because of worsening headaches and vomiting for about 10 days, and then they found these cysts. Ultimately, she underwent surgery and took parasitic or anti-parasitic medications. Eventually, they had a follow-up and showed luckily that she had no new cysts detected in the brain or in other organs. All right, this is our checkpoint for flatworms in the phylum Platyhelminthes. So remember that for segmented flatworms, these are cestodes or tapeworms, and their body is made of those segments called proglottids. For unsegmented, we have the trematodes or flukes. These are flat, leaf-shaped worms that have suckers for attachment. Helminth infections affect hundreds of millions of people worldwide. So Ascaris lumbricoides alone can infect up to 1 billion people. So maybe about 1 billion people are currently infected. Even our hookworms and schistosoma are in the hundreds of millions. In the US, exposure to Toxocara, which is a roundworm that's often found in our pets, like our dogs and cats, is found in about 14% of our population in the US. And because of their prevalence and chronic effects, helminths are a major global health concern and are listed as neglected tropical diseases by the WHO, the World Health Organization. This means that these diseases primarily affect people in poverty in tropical regions and receive insufficient funding and attention compared to other major diseases. I showed you a picture of this before, but this is guinea worm, and guinea worm disease caused by Dracunculus medinensis is caused by drinking water contaminated with small crustaceans that can carry the larvae, so water fleas that can carry the larvae. These worms can migrate and eventually emerge painfully through the skin, as you can see here. The good news is that global eradication campaigns through things like water filtering and health education have reduced the number of cases from the millions in the 1980s to only a handful today. So this is one of the many remarkable success stories that we have, and hopefully we can have many more addressing those neglected tropical diseases soon. All right, so let's recap our parasitic helminths. For the first one, why do we include the study of parasitic worms within micro? Remember that many helminths are diagnosed by their microscopic eggs or larvae. So even though worms can get really big, they're infective and diagnostic stages are microscopic. For looking at the second one, basic morphology of the major groups, we had three. We had our nematodes or roundworms that are cylindrical, unsegmented, and have a complete digestive tract. Our second group were the trematodes or flukes. They're flat, leaf-shaped, unsegmented, and they had suckers for attachment. And our third were the cestodes. These are the tapeworms. They're also flat. They're segmented. They have a scolex with hooks and suckers for attachment and a body made of those proglottids. For the third characteristics of parasitic nematodes, so we looked at how they have unsegmented bodies. These are roundworms that have a complete digestive system, and they're often intestinal parasites. They have infective eggs like Ascaris lumbricoides. The eggs are ingested and then hatch in the host intestine. They also have infective larvae like hookworms. We talked about Necator americanus and Cyclostoma duodenale. These have larvae that can penetrate the host, penetrate the skin of the host to cause infection. For the fourth one, looking at parasitic trematodes. So trematodes are also called flukes. These were non-segmented flatworms that had oral or ventral suckers. They had complex life cycles with multiple hosts. We talked about Clonorchus, that's a liver fluke, Paragonimus, the lung fluke, and Schistosoma, that are blood flukes. For cestodes, we talked about how they're segmented. They have a scolex with hooks and suckers. Proglottids have reproductive organs, and they require an intermediate host. For example, Taenia saginata, Taenia solium, and Diphyllobothrium. So we have the beef, the pork, and the fish tapeworm, respectively. For the fifth one, primary causes of infection. So this is kind of similar. For Enterobius vermicularis, that was the pinworm. We had Trichinella, which causes trichinosis. Ascaris lumbricoides, which was a roundworm. For trematodes, we talked about Schistosoma, which causes schistosomiasis. We had Clonorchus, the liver fluke. For cestodes, we had Taenia saginata from beef, Taenia solium from pork, and Echinococcus from dog. So that was a dog tapeworm. And then classifying them, again, in the phylum Nematoda, we had roundworms like Ascaris, Enterobius, or Trichinella. And for phylum Platyhelminthes, these are the flatworms. Those included the trematodes or flukes, including Schistosoma or Clonorchus. And then we also had the cestodes, which are tapeworms like Taenia or Echinococcus. And that takes us to the end of our second video. In our third video, we're going to look at eukaryotic fungi, such as yeasts and molds.